All right, let's continue working down our layout here inside Photoshop and simultaneously working our way down the layers panel here as well. The next layer that we have is our slideshow. Okay, so that's what we're going to go after next. Now, this is actually going to be pretty interesting. This is going to give me an opportunity to show you some neat things here. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out quite a bit on my layout, maybe something like this, right? I'm just using Controller Command minus on my keyboard. What I want to do is I actually want to go and open up a photograph and I want to drop it into my slideshow. So it's going to be a placeholder photograph. Now, the imagery that we're going to be using is actually imagery from Flickr that we're able to use commercially anyway, but we have to make sure to give credit to the Flickr users. So we'll be sure to do that as we work our way along. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and open up the first guy here. So I'm going to hit Control or Command O on my keyboard to get me into my Open dialog box. And inside my Work Files folder, you'll find a file called vasilisonline.jpg. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That's our Flickr user's name. Okay, Vasilis Online. Go ahead and grab that and pop them open inside Photoshop. Now, in an effort to find sort of Halloween-related imagery or things that would fit with our web layout, this is one of the images that I was able to find, although it isn't maybe quite the best, but we're going to go with it anyway. Now, what's interesting to note here inside Photoshop is the way that Photoshop behaves by default is it opens up different images, different files in these different tabs, which isn't quite what we want because we want to be able to take this photo and drag and drop it into our layout. So first of all, before we do anything, just double check that you have your slideshow layer selected inside your layers panel, if you would. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom out on my photograph here as well. Once again, Controller Command minus on your keyboard. And then I'm going to grab the actual document tab there at the top of the Photoshop interface, and I'm going to click and drag down. And it's kind of hard to explain, but basically what happens is we now have the photo floating inside a document window on top of our layout, our Photoshop layout. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my photo, I'm going to grab his background layer, as a matter of fact, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop this guy into my Photoshop layout, just like this. Okay, now you wind up getting, kind of a mess. It's, maybe not quite sitting the way we want. It's obviously overlapping other content, this sort of thing. It's a bit of a mess here now inside Photoshop. But as I mentioned just a moment ago, this gives me an opportunity to show you some cool stuff here inside Photoshop. So a moment ago, I had you double check and make sure that you had your slideshow layer selected. And that was because I wanted to make sure that the photograph got added into our layers panel on top of the previously selected layer, which is exactly what we have here. Perfect. All right, now I want to show you something in Photoshop here called clipping groups. I don't know if you know about clipping groups from some of your prior work or not. It's a form of masking here inside Photoshop, and it's really, really cool. If you've never done it before, first of all, it's really simple to achieve, to pull off, and you get some pretty cool results as well. Okay, here's how I always explain clipping groups. We're going to take the object underneath our photo. I'm just going to disable the photo's visibility for a moment. So that's going to be the slideshow object himself, this guy right here, this gray rectangle. He's going to serve as a cookie cutter. And imagine that our photo is the dough, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to clip away from the photo, but it's non-destructive. So we're not going to actually be deleting any pixels out of our photograph, okay? That's what I mean by non-destructive. So here's how to pull it off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down either Option here on the Mac or Alt on the Windows side and bring your cursor between the two layers inside the layers panel. And notice you get kind of this weird, kind of funky looking icon. This icon, by the way, is different in previous versions of Photoshop. So if you're running an earlier version of Photoshop, you'll see a slightly different weird, funky cursor. But in any regard, with Alt or Option held down, I'm going to single click, and that creates for us this thing called a clipping group. Okay? Now, let me try and break this down. First of all, notice that the cookie cutter slideshow now appears underlined inside the layers panel. And layer 1, the photograph, is now indented with this downward pointing arrow. And over inside my layout, I can see that any parts of the photograph that fell outside of that gray rectangle are now masked away. They're hidden. We can't see them, okay? They're still there. Again, it's non-destructive, but they're just clipped away or masked away, all right? Pretty cool stuff. So it's almost like the slideshow rectangle is now like a little window. It's almost like this photograph is actually behind the rectangle when in fact it's actually on top. It's pretty cool, okay? Now, that's all fine and well. What can we do with this, though? Well, make sure that your photograph layer is selected. As a matter of fact, maybe we should rename this to Photo or Slideshow Photo or Vasilis Online or something like that, whatever you want. Make sure that that guy's selected, and then with my Move tool selected inside the toolbox, I can actually click and drag and move this guy around inside the rectangle, something like this, to get him positioned. Or what I could do is I could use my free transform, Controller Command T. We've seen this a bunch of times already. And then maybe holding down Shift, I could pull on some of the corners, maybe something like this, and kind of scale them and position them and move them around and kind of get them set up however I want, right? So maybe I wind up with something like this, or, who knows? You can sit here and fiddle around a little bit, or, even use your arrow keys to kind of reposition things, something like that. Okay? All right, there you go. There's clipping groups, pretty cool stuff. And of course, combining multiple images together. I'm going to finish this exercise off by selecting both the photo and the slideshow. And you guessed it, Controller Command G on my keyboard to group those guys together. And of course, I'll rename this to Slideshow. There we go.